Van life and photography seem to go hand in hand. I mean, you'll want to take all the photos of the beautiful places you visit. But what if you could turn your hobby into a money making career? Well, that's exactly what van lifer Quin Schrok did. And in this episode of the Wayward Home podcast, we're talking all about how to become a professional photographer to fund your van life dreams. Let's go.
Welcome to the Wayward Home Podcast, all about van life, boat life, and nomadic living. We'll bring you tips, interviews, and stories from the road and on the water. Now, here's your host, Kristen Haynes.
Hey there, I'm Kristen Haynes with thewaywardhome.com, and I spend half the year in my camper van and half on my sailboat in Mexico. I hope to inspire you to live nomadically too. Well, turning your passion for photography into a career while living and traveling in a van is a great way to make money on the road. And that's exactly what van lifer Quin Schrok does for a living. This episode first appeared as a session for the Van Life Virtual Summit, which I hosted for Project Van Life. Let's get into it. Quin Schrok is an adventure photographer who's been featured in publications like National Geographic, Outdoor Magazine, Sunset Magazine, and more. So, Quin, thanks so much for joining us in the Van Life Virtual Summit. We're so excited you're here.
Happy to be here. Happy to become a part of the Van Life, the Project Van Life community. I've been following you guys for so long. So yeah, it's good to get involved.
Very cool. So first of all, let's just talk a little bit about your, van life part of your lifestyle and just what your lifestyle looks like in general as a professional photographer, because I think you're living the dream that a lot of people aspire for. So first, let's jump into that.
Yeah. So with my career, I'm traveling probably half the time, as in traveling away from my vehicles. So originally it was just the idea that I don't like paying for rent that I'm not using for like half the time. So it was just kind of a logical like way to save money. And then when I was home, I was traveling to, I don't know, Yosemite or just different national parks, and I didn't want to be tied down to just one location. So van life for me was very practical, and it fit my career as a photographer. Um, that being said, in the beginning, I didn't have enough money to get a van. So, I started doing photography or traveling full time around 2014. And all I could afford then was a Corolla. I had like a 2000 Corolla or 1999 Toyota Corolla. Um, and so I would just see vans alongside the road, and I pretty much instantly knew that that was like the end goal. Not so much like, oh man, I'm going to go out and buy one right now, but oh, I'm going to save up hopefully in a year or two, or it actually took longer than that for me, that I would be able to afford a Sprinter van or something like that. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I can go in depth. I'm kind of given the overview right now, but is there a section
Yeah.
that you wanted me to go in depth on there?
Yeah, no, that's great I think it's important that people know that you started in a Corolla, because I started in a Prius and I'm in a Sprinter now, but it takes time to like move up, and that's okay. And I think people sometimes think like, oh, I have to like spend a ton of money on a Sprinter immediately, which is not true. Like you and I started in cars. So I just think that's really cool for people to know that.
Yeah, both Toyotas.
Yeah, both Toyotas. Yeah, and so I'd love to hear about like now what you're doing. It sounds like you split your time between the van and international travel. So tell us just a little bit about like what your lifestyle looks like.
Yeah, so like I just got back from 6 weeks in Norway. I had three different jobs there, and I guess two of them were photography jobs, like freelance photography, not social media related, and then one of them was for a client that I work with called Insta360. Just did a sponsored post for them. So about half of my jobs you see on online on social media, and the other half probably you would see on social media, but not on my personal page. And this time of year, when I got started in photography, I kind of saw it as random, like, oh man, I won't get a job for like 2 months, and then I'll have like 10 jobs in 1 month. And over time, because I've been doing this full time since 2015, so what is that, 8 years? Over time, I've been able to see that there's somewhat of a trend each year. I have downtime like from January to May, and then May it starts picking up, and summer is my busy time. Fall is my even busier time. So summer and fall is like, it's kind of like I'm like the opposite of a tax accountant. You know, like my slow time is when taxes are happening, and then like summer to fall, I'm pretty much super busy. So I was able to schedule this call with you guys in between different trips that I'm doing. But and that how it relates to van life is during my slow time, I'm pretty much full time in my van. And I actually like I'm in a Sprinter too. I like being in the van when it's cold because it's easy to heat, but it's a little bit harder to cool. Like right now, I'm just in my parents' house because I needed a place that I wasn't going to be sweating to death in my van making this video. So I like doing van life in the winter in general, and then summer. Usually I'm abroad doing things like in Norway or wherever. Yeah, or backpacking up in the mountains in Pacific Northwest or the Sierras or something like that.
That sounds amazing. That you are right about the heat being difficult to manage. We were up near Seattle just to escape some of the heat waves in Oregon, so I get it.
Yeah, I'm gonna head up that way soon. Right now I'm in Southern California. I just haven't made the migration yet.
Totally. Yeah. So let's talk about how you got into photography in the first place. What inspired you to take this on?
It wasn't really like a conscious choice. It was just more so like the craze of smartphones. You know, I had a smartphone, and Instagram started becoming popular. So I had like an iPhone 4 or something like that. That was probably my first camera. Um, and I went to school in Hawaii. So it was a combination of having a phone that had decent capabilities as a camera and being in a beautiful place. So, you know, I was set up for success in that way because everything looks good in Hawaii. Like that's basically what made me stand out as a photographer, being in a beautiful place. Like I can't really take much credit for the beginning stages. And for that reason, I think a lot of people want to see Hawaii. Like a lot of people like the idea of like, oh, I'm on this Instagram thing, and apparently I can follow whoever I want. Like I don't even need to know these people. Because back in the day, like with Facebook, it was weird to like Facebook stalk somebody, like somebody that you didn't know, right? But Instagram kind of blew the doors open to like following, being like socially normal to follow someone that you didn't know, that you were just kind of somewhat interested in their life or their work or whatever. So people started to see Hawaii, and they're like, why wouldn't I want a little bit of Hawaii on my news feed? So they started following me in that way. I attribute a lot of my following to getting started early and also being in Hawaii at that time. Um, and then over time, I started to get like better as a photographer. But in the beginning, it's just kind of like documenting where I was living and using what I had, which was, yeah, like the iPhone 4 or something like that.
Cool. And then, so you started out with the phone, and then eventually, I'm guessing you moved to a camera. But how did
Yeah.
you figure that? What was your progression, and how did you hone your skill to be where you are today? Like, did you take classes, or what did you do?
So I hmm, a lot of the reason why I became a photographer was just my life situation at the time. When I was in Hawaii, as I was mentioning, I was living in Hawaii. I was married and an accountant. So I wasn't like I didn't have like creative ambitions at all. I was making decisions based off of financial, like stable financial future, about to buy a house in the suburbs and, you know, get a job at a big four accounting firm, whatever. And one day, I just woke up and my wife at the time was gone, ghosted me. So, I mean, that's a long story. I could go into that, but that's not what this is about. So what happened was that just opened up a massive hole of free time for me, right? I had to like fill what originally was my accounting and just my married life. All of a sudden, I had all this extra free time, and that's kind of when I started. Wasn't necessarily I started focusing on photography, but I started focusing on exploring, hiking, I got a good camping setup and I started camping places and doing things like that were just interesting to me. And it was kind of in my mind, it was the opposite of the married life that I had, where I had like full freedom. I could do whatever. I was just kind of like cut loose. And because I had the cell phone, I started taking photos of these epic campsites on the top of mountains in Hawaii. Um, and people were pretty into that. So because of that, like because I started getting into like outdoor stuff like that, um, I ended up taking a job at Anasazi. It's like wilderness therapy program. So I moved off of Hawaii to Arizona, and the reason to do this was to hone in my wilderness skills, my like survival skills. I just got really into like being self-reliant and being able to handle myself outdoors and things like that. So when I moved out there to Anasazi, I met a new friend. Her name was Kate, and started doing little road trips with her on our off time. And I distinctly remember going because I was in Arizona. We did a road trip up to Utah, up to Arches National Park. And we were under Double Arch, it's a really iconic place in Arches National Park. And I was there with my cell phone looking up and trying to take photos and she was over there with her Canon camera. And I would scoff at her thinking like, my phone is just as good. Like, why do you need a separate camera? Like, I don't get it. Like, whatever. But I remember saying to her something like, "Oh man, I don't know what it is. I just can't capture it." Like, I was shooting up to the sky, and it was exposing for the bright, so like it was hard to see the arches. It was like really dark, and I didn't have the ability to change the settings or like hone in what I actually was seeing. Like, I wanted to look like what my eyes were seeing, but it wouldn't capture it. And Kate's like, "Oh, I'm actually really liking these photos. Check them out." And her photos looked exactly like what I wanted, right? And that was the first time that I realized, I'm like, "How do you get that?" She's like, "Oh, I shoot on manual." I'm like, "What is that?" Like so, like underneath these double arches, I was kind of getting like my first taste of true photography, where like you can change each setting. And she's like, "I change like four settings for each shot depending on what I want out of it." And I'm like, "Okay, what are these things?" And it sounded like at the time it was like, man, I see the merit because the photo's good, but you have to like in your mind calculate like math, almost like calculate what the right setting is. Like, I don't know, it just seemed pretty crazy. And I was a little bit turned off because it was so much information right at the time. But that relationship, that friendship continued through the summer when I was in Arizona. And little by little, I started understanding like what f-stop was and shutter speed and all the different things that come with professional photography. Um, and it was such a good experience. I was having so much fun. Like, first and foremost, exploring and finding these new places, just like seeing them with my own eyes because they were so amazing. But then the cherry on top was to be able to capture it properly. I started borrowing her camera more often than using my phone. And I just started to see the merit in being able to control specifically the output and how your photos look in the end. Because with the cell phone, it's really nice because like it does most of the stuff for you, and like maybe 80% of the time it does a really good job. But it is kind of nice also to feel like you put a little bit more of yourself into the image by like choosing those specific settings, based off of how you want it to end up.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting because, some people are overwhelmed, I think, myself included. I do know how to change the manual settings, but it can be kind of difficult. So I often just pull out my phone instead of using my camera. And I'm
Yeah.
just wondering, like, what your advice is to quickly maybe learn those things and start applying it to photography as experimentation, or what could someone do to start doing this?
I will say, cell phones have gotten way better too. This is like 9 years ago now. It's 2014. So um, I still kind of I'm a pretty big advocate for using your phone, especially for like video because video is so popular now. Uh, phone does or the at least the iPhone that I use, I'm sure a lot of the other Samsungs and stuff have great capabilities too. especially for video. It's like it has really good stabilization and kind of like I don't know. I think things look better on a phone than like when I shoot video on my Sony camera. Like I don't really like it. It's kind of like jumpy. Like I need to bust out a tripod, and I don't even want to carry a tripod. So I am an advocate, especially for phone videography. I think it's easily the best way to go for like 99% of things out there. But sorry, what was your question? How do you break into
Like,
the
yeah, like how do you start using these manual settings without getting really overwhelmed by all the different settings?
um for me, I had a crash course of like using it every day. We're talking like we would shoot sunset or we would shoot sunrise, midday, sunset every day. And we eventually were so into those road trips, like on the off weeks, that me and Kate just took off for 6 months and we drove up to Canada, all around the West Coast and into Mexico, all the way down to Panama. So it turned into like I was so obsessed with that at the time. And I think it's just what I needed at the time. That we ended up just camping next to the side of the car for 6 months straight and taking photos every day. Um, and at the time, it was like that's just like that's what felt right. And I was kind of just like a sponge eating up all this like new information on how to capture things. And more so, it's just like really fun to at the time, I remember thinking like this is my window where I have enough free time to experience this and do this. Like, who knows? Maybe I'll be married again next year. And like, this is just like the window to take advantage of like being young and free. And like, I have a car that runs and gets good gas mileage. I wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, I wish I had a Sprinter van. It was just kind of like, I have what I have a little bit of money, and let's see how far this money can last. And so for me, it was a crash course in photography because it was just my obsession at the time. And I know a lot of other people that get into photography, it's more so like just the side hobby, and it like kind of like is like slow progress over time. But that's just wasn't my experience. It was just kind of like, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is the only thing I'm going to do until my money runs out, and then I'm going to get another job. Yeah, and that's kind of how it was for the first like 3 or 4 years of my photography. It was either like full time on the road, shooting as much as I can, or I would have to go back and get like a temporary summer job or something like that. I didn't go back to accounting because it just all of a sudden was just not where I wanted to be when I started like road tripping and camping and stuff. Is like I didn't want like that stark contrast of like going back, cutting my hair, combing my hair, and like putting on like a shirt and tie and going into account. It would just feel too like stark and like depressing in my mind. So that's why I got like a job like, learning how to survive in the wilderness and stuff like that. It felt like it was at least something that like could pertain to my photography and elevate my photography, to have those skills. But yeah, so for someone that's trying to get into it, I would just say the the most important thing is to find a subject matter or something even outside of photography, like find the thing that you care about the most, like something that you're obsessed with, like some dudes I know are like really into baseball or something like that. Like maybe you could get a zoom lens and you can go to the games and shoot that because it's something that you care about and you care enough about it that you want to do it justice. So you're gonna really put in the time and effort into creating the best images possible. And for me, it was like epic landscapes in the Western United States at the time because I was born and raised in California, and I didn't go to Yosemite until I was like 25. Like it was just kind of like, wow, at 25 I finally found like my backyard and like this is crazy. Why did I not know of this when I was like 15 years old? And I was like, you know kind of hating on where I grew up because I didn't really see the beauty of it, and now I see like I need to spread the word. You know what I'm saying? So like it was kind of like this passion of mine, It's like I finally found something that I was really into, so I need to share it with everyone else. So that kind of pushed me into like feeling the need to capture it as best as possible. And it was also just this fun challenge. Like I just became obsessed with like first off finding cool new places, and then the next challenge was to like find the right angle to help it translate to a single image. At the time, in the very beginning, it was all photography. I wasn't really doing much video. So for people starting out now, it's the landscape's changed a bit, and video at this point is arguably more important than photo. But it's kind of the same general concept, like what video can you take that will inspire others to go out and see this for themselves? You know, how can you showcase it in the best light or show your personality? Like if you're really that stoked, like show you interacting with it and how it makes you happier and it adds to, you know, your daily happiness or whatever. um, yeah, that's kind of the approach that I would take is to try to find a subject matter that really gets you going and that will really push you to try to capture it in the best way possible. And that will make you, it's the same concept of like if you move to Mexico and nobody speaks English, you're going to have to figure out how to express yourself. You're going to have to learn how to speak Spanish. So like if you put yourself in this situation where it's like almost like a dire need, like, man, I love this so much, like I got to figure out how to communicate this with other people. That passion will translate, people will see it and they'll want to follow along. Or if you're looking at from the client perspective, they'll want to maybe pay you to get a little bit of that passion on their end to help them with whatever they want, selling a product or showcasing a location or whatever, whoever the client is, you know.
Yeah, and do you think that it's easier for people if they want to break into it to make money to like work on their social media profile or work on actually finding paying clients? Like which route would you suggest to someone?
I focus on my craft and building my social profile. I think that's probably what most people do. Um, Simply because the few times that I've reached out to clients, it's been such a different it's been a different situation where like if I reach out, it's obvious that I need the money. I don't know how I put this. Basically, it puts them in the negotiation chair. So um, they didn't necessarily reach out to me because they liked my content, my photos. So what happened was they said they agreed to me taking photos of their product, like 10 unique images or so, and we agreed to a price. Um, and turns out when I delivered those 10 unique images, they weren't necessarily what they were looking for. So that particular job that I'm referring to dragged on for like 6 months because in the end, hindsight looking back on it, I reached out to them. They weren't interested in my photography. I had to bend over backwards to try to meet their needs. So I had to kind of bend my photography ability to create images that I wouldn't normally create, right? And it turned out to be way more work than what they paid. It wasn't worth what they paid me. And so I think it does really work, specifically to the creator's benefit if the client is genuinely interested in your work and what you've established yourself as being good at. Um, because then it will kind of run smoother. You know, they already like what you're doing. It naturally integrates into your body of work. So with that, if you're trying to attract clients to reach out to you, you know, it's easier said than done. So like I'm able to rely on that and do it that way because I have a large following. So the first step is to gain that following. And you know, that's the tricky one. I feel like that's what everyone wants to know. Um, I think passion really translates for sure. So going back to like finding something that you really care about, as opposed to like just jumping on bandwagons and kind of like recreating shots. You know, if you go to Yosemite and you go create the classic shots that have been posted multiple times, um, just trying to think about it from a content or from a client's perspective, why would they want to work with you if your body of work is pretty much the same as everyone else's? You know what I'm saying? So like every time you post on social media, generally you have to really be able to stand by that work as if it's your own voice, your own unique take, and it's giving clients a reason to work with you because you're the only one that's created that, you know. It's a tough business for sure. It's super competitive, as everyone knows. But and I will also note, like, if this is if you're just starting out with photography, um, I just hated on recreating images. It's almost a necessary step in the beginning. You know, like if there's someone that you really look up to and you hope to be like, maybe save a few of the images, go out and recreate those just so you know how the process works, you know, so that like the veil is kind of pulled back and you see like, okay, so he shot it at this time of day because it looks better at this time of day. And why is this photo so good? Oh, I guess like the road is leading into the view, right? So like it's like this leading line that draws the viewer in. So you're trying to like that recreation process kind of has to happen, but the quicker you do that, understand the overarching concepts of what makes a photo engaging and good, um, then you can take those concepts and apply them into new and unique ways, right? So it's kind of like this step-by-step process. Like I don't know anyone who didn't start out like recreating in like somewhat derivative like ways, like where they were um, yeah, just kind of like doing a shot by shot, like classic shots. Like that's what I did. And my inspiration in the beginning was Chris Burkard. And I recreated a bunch of his shots. Um, and then from there, eventually, like a few years later, I was able to branch out and try some new things. And now I think I'm like 9 years into my career. I kind of see it as like off limits. If something has been done before, I try to avoid that. Not always, but like I try to do something different and think of myself every time I post as like showcasing that this is my unique vision. And for that reason, I'm able to command a higher rate when I'm negotiating when a client reaches out because they believe and I believe that I have a unique voice, you know.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a process. Like someone's not going to be a professional photographer overnight. They need to work on it and really practice their craft for a while and hone their voice and style.
Yeah, one of the biggest things I think a lot of people stress about is they want to be that unique and creative voice like from their first post, you know. And in all reality, it's just a process. And I think in the beginning, that recreation is a necessary step. It's just how quickly you can get through that step and onto the pushing the limits and doing more unique things, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And so if someone is a kind of a more of a beginner and they want to choose a camera to play with and practice with, do you have any recommendations for that?
Definitely your phone. I mean, I just think the phone is always going to be like, I mean, I'm 9 years into it and I still use probably my phone more often than my professional camera for stories and reels and all these things like these videos. It's still like my most important piece of equipment for getting paid. That being said, you know, at a certain point, if you're getting photography offers, oftentimes they want like raw images and like high resolution images for them to use for their own print or online use or something like that. So you can't you I bought a camera off of my first job offer that required high resolution images. I bought a camera when it was obvious that like it was just like I couldn't get around it, right? So I don't necessarily think that it's important to a person's creativity to have like a really nice camera. But when it comes to corporate clients and things like that, sometimes you need it. So I purchased a Sony. I can't even remember. I think it was A7 II or something back in the day. But right now I have a Sony A7R5. Um, just as it's a high resolution landscape photography camera. And yeah, I would recommend Sony, but at the same time, like Canon, Nikon, Fujifilm, it's all really good. And I don't think like you choosing Fujifilm is gonna um, keep you from getting clients. I don't think clients ever really like think, oh, this person is using this camera, so I'm gonna work with them. They look at your body of work. Really doesn't matter like which one you choose, but at a certain point with professional photography, you're going to need a higher resolution camera than your phone. Um,
Yeah.
but I will say I've gotten jobs because I use my phone. Occasionally, like I'll post an image that's an iPhone shot, and Apple will reach out. Or like, there are certain clients that really appreciate cell phone creation. There's a lot of accessories out there that I've also done jobs with that are like iPhone accessories. So like it's, it's important to use your phone. It's also important to have a high resolution megapixel camera um, when you start getting like freelance photography work.
For sure, for sure. And is there like a favorite lens that you have, or if someone's just starting out and they want to get one lens, like do you have something that would be a recommendation for that?
I do for what I do. I'm a landscape photographer, so I got a 16 to 35 f4 lens back in like 2014 when I first got that Sony camera, and I still use that lens like probably 75% of the time. It's the same lens. It's super beat up at this point, but yeah, if you're into landscape photography, I think 16 to 35 is kind of a core lens to have. Um, and then maybe second to that, I have a 24 to 240, which is massive range. So 24 is relatively wide, and 240 millimeter is pretty zoomed in. So if I'm going out somewhere that potentially would have wildlife, it's nice to have that zoom lens capability. I could take a photo of a bear or whatever with that 240 millimeter. So depending on where I'm at in the world and the subject matter that I'm hoping to shoot, those are my two most common lenses.
Very good. And then another thing I'm wondering is how important it is for people to know post-production work and use those types of programs that can be overwhelming. Do people need to know that, or or not in the professional world?
I'm an advocate for very little post-production. I don't like it. I don't like sitting in front of the computer more than I need to. But there are people that have made their whole career off of having a specific editing style. I've never used presets. I've never even opened Photoshop. I exclusively use Lightroom. Um, and I my typical editing time is probably 1 minute, 1 to 5 minutes. For a photo that I'm going to post on my feed, maybe I'll edit it for 5 minutes. Um, so yeah, I don't spend much time in the post processing. Um, I know it's a way to set yourself apart if you want to have a signature look. It's almost like sometimes I go to people's feed and it looks like they're in some alternate reality because it's darker than normal, or like the yellows are turned orange. It's like, wow, this like I've been there. It looks kind of like an alternate like twist on reality. And that's a different way to go about it. But my opinion is I don't ever want to send somebody to a specific place like the Grand Canyon or something, and they get there and they think, oh, it doesn't actually look like that. because I do know that like, occasionally people have gone like been inspired to go see a certain view because of my work. So it just doesn't really sit right with me. I'm trying to edit it as close to what it looks like in real life as possible. Um, but at the same time, I do spend a lot of time in the front end. Like you're asking about post processing, that's back end work. I spend a lot of time on the front end going to the location. Maybe I show up at 3 p.m. and for some reason the lighting's kind of off. It's not what I like. So I have an app on my phone called Photo Pills that can predict where the sun will be at certain times. So maybe I get there and the sun's behind me, but I want it to be in front of me because I like to shoot into the sun more than away from the sun. So I'll figure out when the best time of day is where the sun is in the frame, and I'll come back then and just so I'll kind of put in the time and work before the photo, and that does a lot of the editing for me if the natural light is good.
Yep, yep, that's great advice. That makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, I'm wondering if you can just tell us if just the major ways a professional photographer makes money, just like some of the what you've seen out there that people can expect to find.
Um, I make my money two ways. So I do sponsored posts occasionally on my Instagram feed, and then oftentimes a client will find me through my Instagram feed, but will hire me not necessarily to post back onto my feed, but to just come out and take photos for them, and so that they could use those photos to post on their feed or on their website or print out or whatever. So like it is somewhat funneled through my Instagram channel, but about half the time it doesn't end up on that channel. And I generally can charge a lot more when I'm marketing and putting it on my Instagram feed. Um, but that's also somewhat stressful, like, because sometimes like the product's not super on brand for me, so I don't really want to endorse it on my page, but I'm happy to take photos of that product and have them use it. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm not I don't have a crazy high standard of things that I take photos of, but I do have a high standard of what I put on my Instagram feed. You know what I'm saying? So sometimes I'll negotiate. Sometimes they'll want me to post it on my feed, and I'll negotiate out of that and say no, but I can take photos for you. So those are two ways that probably the two most common ways that I make money. And occasionally I'll actually make money on my van builds. I'll spend some time, like especially during the pandemic, I spent more time building my vans than traveling the world because I couldn't travel the world. So that was a source of income for that section where I just wasn't working as much as a photographer. Those are my three streams of revenue. But in terms of other photographers, how they make their money, a lot of photographers like license their photos. Like after the fact, if you have a really, really good photo of like the Grand Tetons or something, maybe some random corporation like Citibank or something like that, or American Express is trying to like get a new image for whatever they're marketing, and they'll reach out and you can license an image for like $1,000, or if it's a big campaign for like $5,000 or something like that. That's a tough one though, because you're kind of just waiting for them to reach out. I guess maybe you could put in the legwork and just reach out, send like mass reach out emails, like 100 emails to big corporations. I just don't really know how you would get that contact information. Maybe some people have sneaky ways to do it on like LinkedIn, like finding different people, but I'm not familiar with how that is like a sustainable business practice. One thing that people think of with photography, like that they could become like a staff writer for a magazine or get like a cover on a magazine, or like just magazines in general would be a source of revenue. And it's true. Like I've had multiple covers on like Outside Magazine and Sunset Magazine and Visit USA, and I had a centerfold in Nat Geo. These are like prestigious things that people want, but they don't pay well. Like the going rate for a cover is $500, even for like big name magazines. Even sometimes big name magazines pay less because it's like they're paying you with like the honor, like the resume building thing, you know? So that's one thing that I would mention, like kind of debunking that, like being a photographer featured in a magazine is not going to make you wealthy. What is probably the most lucrative is like working with big corporations like car companies, airlines, things like that. And like some people really rely on cars because they're car people. Like depending on what you post, if you're really into cars, maybe car corporations would be like your core clients, but they're not for me. I would rather work with airlines because I'm more travel based. I don't just post photos of my car very often. So every time you're posting something, if you're posting something of you in nature with clothes on, those are all potential clients. You know what I'm saying? Like everything you post, you got to kind of like drill down into it and like where, if this is genuinely what I want to be doing, where is the potential client here? It's one thing like I can post a landscape shot of Lake Tahoe with no people in it, and it's beautiful and it might perform well for the algorithm or whatever. But the only real potential client there is like tourism. There's not any clothing, or it's not like a car. I guess maybe it could be like an airline, but like that's kind of a somewhat of a stretch. So, tourism doesn't tend to pay as well as corporate clients. So cars pay well, and like I said, airlines and even maybe electronic companies, things like that. So if you're trying to attract an electronic company like Sony, maybe you start doing tutorials on how you created the shot or what camera you use and why. Like if you start putting things out and basically assuming the role of an expert in your field, there's a good chance that Sony eventually will reach out and want to work with you. Or like Adobe Lightroom, if you're doing tutorials on how to edit things, that could be a future client. Or there's a lot of new editing software coming out, especially with AI right now. If you're talking about editing and your editing process, there's a decent amount of software clients that could reach out. So that's a good thing to think about when you start posting and going into a certain industry. Think to yourself, how many potential clients are there in this industry? You know, I think a lot of people tend to focus on the algorithm and what will perform the best. Like for instance, I have a good buddy, Jacob Witzling. He lives in the forest up in Washington, and he's doing this awesome, hilarious series where he creates weird axes. Like he created like a helmet with an axe on the top, and he starts chopping wood with that axe. And it's really goofy and it performs really well for social engagement. But there's not really such thing as a helmet axe that will reach out and want to pay him for that work. So it's kind of like lots of times it's a trade-off with like you trying to get like mass engagement, or are you trying to basically put out something that could be marketed and be seen as like very professional, you know.
Yeah, very cool. Well, that was great. We're kind of running out of time a little bit, but I'm wondering if you have any last advice for people with photography. We've covered a lot. So, yes, anything
Mhm.
else you wanted to add?
Oof. Yeah, I mean, for me, yeah, I would say um, like a current trend, and likely this is going to continue this way. Um, it's very hard to make a name for yourself in photography, videography without showing who you are. like without showing your personality, right? Like if you think of anyone who's grown to a sizable account, it's pretty rare that they're like this anonymous creator. I think it's a pretty common thing for photographers, and I was this way in the beginning too, to like want to just like have their work stand out. Like I don't need to. Nobody cares about me. I just want it about the work. You know what I'm saying? But it's a really really tough way to go, and likely you're going to burn yourself out by trying to create the best possible work, and nobody's going to be able to relate to it because you're not showing the person behind the camera. It's I know a lot of people that go the exact opposite way. That like generally speaking, they don't focus on the work. They focus on themselves. They focus on putting their best face forward, about being relatable. And even if they are like a struggling photographer, that's relatable in and of itself, because most people out there are struggling photographers and trying to figure themselves out. So I would say if you're trying to crack into the social media space, the photography space, it's very important to show who you are, to document the process, and even struggles that you're having, just to be relatable. People like seeing that stuff. So that's a big influence on success or no success, if you're willing to show yourself and to express your personality in your work in that way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing all these tips. And, as always, people can go look at your Instagram, Ever Changing Horizon, correct? And check out your work. It's just phenomenal to look at those pictures. And so, yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story and all this advice for people. It's really appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for the call, Kristen.
Well, thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Wayward Home Podcast. Come on over and follow my adventures on Instagram. And if you have any burning van life questions, send me a DM. You'll find me over there at The Wayward Home. I hope to see you there, and thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Wayward Home Podcast.